Hey everybody, I think I've got some really good information for y'all and I just want to share it. We're always saying, why do nice guys finish last, right? Why do women, jump all over the 5-6 nice guys that want to talk to her to deal with that one asshole that just don't deserve nobody's time or attention, but you just want them so bad. And I think I may have figured out an answer to that question. Stay with me because I'm so serious about this. So I've been reading this book and it's called The Body Keeps Score. Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. I think that's the full title, but it's by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and it's a book about trauma and how it affects the brain and in turn the body. And so there were 2 studies in it that were just so interesting to me that I've got to share. And I think these were around like chapter 2 or 3. I'm not done reading the book, but I mean already I would recommend it to anybody. And so this first study they took these 2 sets of mice and they raised them in 2 different environments. They took the first set of mice and raised them in an ideal mouse environment. It was warm, it was quiet, they had plenty of food, just everything that mice need to be happy. Then they had the second set of mice that it was just the opposite. Food was scarce, their habitat wasn't kept warm. They played loud noises so that these mice were constantly under stress and they had higher levels of cortisol. So you've got these mice, and so at this point, the way that they raise them, what the scientists have done, they just from 2 different sides of the tracks now. And so they take these mice and they let them go and they let them interact together. And then they would play a loud noise that would startle the mice to observe and see what they would do. And the mice 100% of the time returned home. And now that makes sense for the mice that are that were raised in the good environment. But for the mice that were raised up in the fucked up environment, that didn't make sense because it wasn't like that was the only place that they could go. They had been exposed to common areas and they could each go to the other's area if they wanted to. But the mice consistently throughout the study always retreated to their homes. And so I think that says a lot for people who grow up in toxic or traumatic environments. You come back and you're still looking for that in your adulthood. You look for a bit of that in your relationship. And it's a hard wiring that happens in the brain. The other study, this is fascinating. They took these dogs. This is cruel. It's also cruel. But thank God for science. They took these dogs and they exposed them to shock therapy. So they got these dogs and they just shocking them for no reason. Would shock them. So they were in these cages, and on the bottom of the cages were metal grates, and they could electrify the grates when they wanted to and shock the dogs. So they had these dogs that they just over time continued to shock and shock and shock. And they would observe the dogs, what was happening in their brains and in their bodies as they responded to the pain of being shocked over and over. And so then they brought in a second control group of dogs when they wanted to start this experiment. Second control group of dogs that has never been shocked. They were never exposed to the electroshock therapy. They put them both in cages with the electrified grids on the bottom. And the difference was this time they opened the doors to the cages. So the dogs are in the cages, but the doors are open, and they're sitting on the electrified grid. The scientists electrify the grids, shock the dogs. The dogs who had never been shocked before ran out of the cages. Fight or flight, right? A basic human instinct. It's in the oldest part of the brain, your fight or flight response. The dogs that had been shocked repeatedly sat there. They stayed their asses right on that electrified grid as they were being electrocuted for the umpteenth time. Their ability to recognize a trauma and respond to it appropriately had been completely overridden by the fact that they had experienced trauma. It makes so much sense. They said that the only way that they could get those dogs to get off of the electrified grates was to drag them off repeatedly. They had to be forcibly removed from the electrocuting pain that the scientists were putting them through. They had to forcibly remove them from it. And so that just goes to show that what happens in our brain is powerful. It produces physiological responses that we should not ignore. So when somebody tells you that they are depressed, when someone tells you that they have experienced a trauma, you don't tell them to pray it away. You don't tell them to suck it up. You don't tell someone something like that. You tell them, we need to sweep out these cobwebs. Let's talk about it. And if you don't want to talk about it to me, let's find somebody that you will talk about it with. Stop sweeping mental health under the rug. Black people, stop pretending like mental health is not something that isn't real. Okay? We all have a brain. We all have a brain. And on this planet, sense is nothing. There were no emotions. There were no smells. There was nothing on this planet until there was a brain to perceive it. Our brain is so powerful. It's driving our entire existence. It's driving us through this iteration of ourselves on this planet. You owe it to yourself to figure out what's in there. Get in your own head. Get in your own head. Dust your own cobwebs away. Figure out your own shit. We owe that to ourselves. It is 2018. Black people, it is time to take control of your mental health. We need to be whole, happy people so that we're not subjecting ourselves to shit that is not healthy for us, that doesn't help us, that doesn't advance us, that doesn't move us forward. We done taking L's in 2018.